Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us on this week's Nonprofits. Tonight is Monday, April 28th, 2025. And I just want to remind you that the Nonprofits, we are here working for you, but we can't do what we do without your support. So if you will go down to the thanks button, the little one that says thanks in it and has a heart with a dollar sign inside of it, and consider donating to our cause, it would be extremely helpful. But with that, we want to get to the first segment of this week, where it appears the Catholic Church is willing to change its definition of what it constitutes, of what constitutes a life, as long as it saves them money. While you may be used to church claims that life begins at conception, you may be surprised to hear that a Catholic health system, MercyOne, and Catholic Health Initiative Iowa are claiming that they should not be responsible for the death of one Iowa couple's fetus, which they could have potentially prevented, because the loss of the fetus was, and I'm quoting, not the same as the loss of a baby, and that the unborn child should not be considered a patient for the purposes of calculating damages. How convenient that the Catholic Church, the purveyor of limiting bodily autonomy and human rights abuses against women, can suddenly see how costly an unwanted pregnancy is. Sure, fetus is a human, only if they don't have to pay for it. Is this just more hypocrisy from the Catholic Church, or might they have a legitimate claim? And I am going to start with EJ from our wonderful panel of three scholars and gentlemen. But EJ, how does this policy shift, if at all, affect Catholic Church doctrine?
Well, the Catholic Church does have a history of being quite money hungry, and I'm guessing if they were to try and justify it, as they have attempted, it would probably be in the vein of being rational and sound, because that's what everyone wants from us. But in reality, they are, from their point of view, trying to loophole what they believe to be the most powerful being in the universe. So I reckon either they have, either converted to atheism recently, or they've, got a bit strapped for cash. But given how given how churches are decorated in gold and such, I really doubt that's the case.
Sure. And I don't know how churchgoers are supposed to perceive this, or if they'll even care. If they care that perhaps the church is lying to them, or just telling a lie in this case. Tracy, leading up to tonight, you mentioned something about the noble lie. And I was just wondering if you could break down that concept, and how does it relate to this particular situation?
I mean, I'll give you my understanding of the noble lie. The idea of the noble lie, as I understand it, is that you understand a thing to not be true, but you lie. And because you have what can be considered a good motivation behind your lie, it's considered to be, a noble one. So how this could be applied to this situation, I think I may have reached a little bit by saying that it applies here. I think it's more accurate to say that they're just being bullshit artists, and saying whatever will get them their way. I think I was reaching a little bit by using the noble lie. I think it is more accurate to say they're just being bull artists, meaning that they don't really care whether they're being truthful. They don't really care whether they're being dishonest. What matters is, are they getting what they want out of whatever situation?
And I could see that, but let's stick with the noble lie concept, and maybe the noble lie doesn't apply to what they're saying now, but then could it mean that their traditional stance on abortion is a noble lie? Is that the case?
I think it could be seen that way. Their traditional stance could be seen as a noble lie, just because, I mean, you know, back in the day, we had a huge problem with, like, you know, having enough people. You needed to have birth rates be so high. And so even if they don't really see it this way, you know, there was a war and we lost off 40% of all our men. We need to replace those numbers. There was a famine and we lost off we need to replace those numbers. You can't allow, you know, what is it? Long-handled spoons and all the various different ways, because that's going to interfere with the amount of money that the church gets, the amount of soldiers that the king gets, you know, whatever have you.
Sure. Yeah. And this isn't that wouldn't be a solitary case of medieval thinking making its way into modern day and then being challenged. Of course, we see that happen a lot. But I want to kick it over to Rob. So, Rob,
hey,
with this article, in which the MercyOne health system and Catholic Health Initiative seem to be changing their tune on the definition of human life, I understand that you have an update. What should we know about this developing story?
So it did start out as the lawyers were arguing that it wasn't a person because it would have helped their damages or their case. They would have been liable for less. However, enough people apparently complained about it. So then MercyOne put out an update. I'm just going to read a section. The pertinent section says, while the motion to limit damages was accurate from a purely legal standpoint, it has caused confusion and concern. This is why we have asked our counsel to withdraw the motion with respect to MercyOne. No courtroom argument should ever cast doubt on the deeply held Catholic values that guide MercyOne. So they were arguing that the baby was not a person, which is contradictory to their doctrine and belief system. And then when people complained about it and noticed that, they then told their lawyers to withdraw the motion. A couple things about that. Cool. Like, I like that. I like that they're not able to have their cake and eat it too. They're actually forced to stand up for their own belief system. And I suspect that they're not all that salty about it either. Like, this should just have been the thing that it always should have been. However, there was another case in 2006 with a lady named Lori Stodgel. She died at MercyOne, same company, different center, I'm sure. But at the same company, she died. She was carrying twins. And during that time, they did argue successfully that the twins being not born weren't people. So we have to make this distinction between the lawyers versus the hospital that is Catholic and the lawyers who may not be. However, you would suspect that if they care about this a lot, that this is something that they'd have in their policies or they'd have Catholic lawyers. So it seems like they do care, but not enough to get ahead of the problem. But they do care sometimes.
Sure. And this is just one of two bodies in this lawsuit that has changed their tune. Catholic Initiative Iowa, it seems, has not changed their tune. Do I understand that correctly? Like, Catholic Initiative Iowa is an independent organization from MercyOne that kind of oversees some of MercyOne's what is it? The like the pregnancy operations and things like that have not changed their tune. And then if that's the case, you know, what does that say about the fact that, in my opinion, the church sees the price tag, right? And it almost legitimizes the claim that a lot of single mothers and people who are faced with or would be single mothers or people that are faced with abortion have to go through, the considerations that they have to go through. I would say that, you know, a mother forced into pregnancy, they at times don't want to have to do that, but the price tag for them and the price tag for them is usually far lower. I think any mother having a child would be happy to accept $250,000, right, to raise a kid. So yeah. This should be no big deal for the church with golden thrones and things like that. But, you know, EJ, I want to ask you, does the church seeing this $250,000 price tag and saying, holy crap, we have to, you know, this is how much a baby costs? What does that do for mothers who have an argument against people who are trying to restrict their rights to an abortion?
Well, in my opinion, at least in parts, shows that the Catholic Church has no place in law. Sure, they should be able to defend themselves in court, but they shouldn't be able to use their platform in a way that dictates how over 1 billion people, because, yeah, the Catholic Church is that big, it shouldn't dictate how those people could potentially vote. On things like abortion, well, to them, it may be a matter of eternal life and death. They should also realize that in times like this, while we may disagree on gods, we all agree that single mothers and people who could use an abortion for medical or other reasons really, might need them, and that we should probably butt out, given that I don't think it should be our place, and especially not a church's place, to dictate who or when should be able, or who should be able to have an abortion or when.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I did a show with Helen Green, one of our co-hosts, on Monday night, and we talked about the failed leadership of church and failed leadership of clergy, and how oftentimes you have unmarried priests who have no children giving marriage and family advice. And it's kind of like where do they get off injecting themselves into that sector of someone's life? And I see what you're saying, kind of the same token here. Like, this should
you don't
be
go to
proof.
a cyclist for driving advice.
Yeah, right. That's exactly right. And what other proof do we need that the church doesn't belong there? And Tracy, I want to turn that same sentiment to you, because this shows me that the Catholic Church cannot be trusted, although I already had evidence of that, if not for more obvious reasons. But certainly this shows that the Catholic Church will go back on its word if it needs to suit its own needs, no matter how hypocritical. I mean, how much proof do we need that the church cannot be trusted? And do you agree with that? What is your thoughts there, Tracy?
Well, the thing about the Catholic Church is, if you look over its history, it has been very good at changing its stance to fit in with the world around it. And that's how it's been able to survive and maintain its strength and maintain its wealth and maintain its presence. Because although they are slow to change, they do change with the times. They definitely cannot be trusted. I mean, look at all these events that we have with children and whatnot, and priests being moved around, shuffled about, but also just I'll have to agree. They can't be trusted. And how much evidence do we need? I think we have sufficient. I think we've had sufficient for a long time. It's just whether or not you want to acknowledge it or look into it.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling to me how we can allow the church to continue when, if you had a daycare or a karate school or some other body that worked with children be accused of these abuses, it would be shut down the next day. But the church has continued for 2,000 years, which is mind-blowing to me. And, Rob, we can and often do put a lot of blame on Christian and Catholic systems, institutions. But in this situation, how much blame should the parents of the lost fetus assume? What if they were Catholic, or were they Catholic? I don't think we know that, but let's just assume they were, for argument's sake, that they chose a Catholic health system, maybe that was consistent with their beliefs, but now they're turning around and suing the Catholic Church or the Catholic healthcare system. Do the parents bear any blame here?
No, at least I don't think so. They're largely the victims here, and a terrible thing happened, and they're just trying to recover from it. The thing that I think is interesting, assuming they're Catholic, we don't know, is that they are suing the Catholic health system, the MercyOne in this case, and I think more people should do that, because you were talking about like we can't trust them. That's why I started by saying that I think it's actually really lovely that they're owning up to it and they're rescinding their motion. They should have done that in the past, but whether they're forced to do it or whether they did it just because they realize that it is consistent with their own belief system, at this point, I'm just happy that they're doing the thing they say they do. Like, those are gains, bro. You're actually saying you're upholding the belief system that you have. So I am pleased for that. I think the thing that is a little more game theory interesting for me to consider is it is almost assuredly the case that the lawyers are not Catholic, or at least not an explicitly Catholic organization. So as you guys have been talking about like their gilded thrones and such, they really should do that, because the MercyOne, as far as we can tell, if we assume them good intentions, and we shouldn't, but if we assume them good intentions, then once they discovered what their employees were doing, the lawyers, they then rectified it based on their own systems. But they were probably very happy to have plausible deniability for as long as they could. So no, I wouldn't say much about the parents at all. They're just doing what they can. The problem is the church, again.
Yeah, and a lot of parents turn to these healthcare systems because they are cheaper, and they claim to offer, and we've done stories on this in the past. That's why I know this, but they claim to offer certain services, and when that service is needed, they turn around and say, "Oh, but there are all these stipulations," and then they have these lawyers that look out for the church's best interests, even if it means violating the church doctrine. And I just do think that there are a lot of unknowns. I would love to know what the parents' stance was before going into this situation. I'd like to know why they went with this healthcare system to begin with. But, you're right, Rob. I think the church assumed responsibility and then turned around and said, it's not our problem after all. And EJ, you had some other remarks that you wanted to add about the Catholic Church. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the Catholic Church's hypocrisy in the healthcare in general is not a new thing. We all, well, at least maybe not us, but Mother Teresa is often used as a great example of a good human being, despite the fact she raised enough money for a state-of-the-art church, but instead she sent people to die with only the knowledge that they may be redeemed in Christ, despite the fact that if the Catholic Church is right, I'm pretty sure there was a guy called Jesus who didn't really care if people believed, he just liked to heal. Well, at least if they're to be believed. So the Catholic Church finally sticking to their guns, as Rob was saying, should hopefully be a good thing, even if it does screw them over in the end.
Yeah, well, I think to Rob's point, something that I think is significant is that they did change their tune, but only after pressure was applied to them, right? And so, Tracy, I would just want to get your opinion on that. What does that say about this organization that they did not do the right thing until they were pushed into a corner?
So I'm not terribly familiar with the lawyer and client, counselor client relationship. I'm not terribly familiar with that. I am going to have to agree with Rob about how, at least they're at least trying to be consistent now that they've been called out on it. But I don't know if they were even aware. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know if they were even aware that was the defense the lawyer was bringing, because you got to think with a company this large. What's up, Rob? I see you moving your hand. What do you want to say?
But that's exactly the point, and I actually agree, because they may not have even known that it was happening, which is a further problem. Because if they're big enough to be able to get into healthcare all by themselves, if the church can get into healthcare, then the church can get into law, and then they can employ their own lawyers that are actually making sure that they're doing the standards that they want. The fact that it has to come to their attention affords them a level of plausible deniability that may not be intentional, but it is convenient.
Sure.
Well, I'll have to agree with you, Rob. I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. It is awful convenient that you're right. They're big. They got money. They should be paying a little bit better attention to what's going on in their corporation. And
This is a matter of eternal life and death. You'd think they'd take it more seriously.
you think it would? You would think
They
a
also-
genuine believer in the thing would take it a little bit more serious. But-
EJ, go ahead.
They also were historically, when you said, oh, they get into health, they can get into law. Historically in Europe, they were into law, but for some reason they seem to drop out of that because it's almost like everyone realized having the church in law was a kind of bad idea.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a very good point. The fumbling of the church in creating diplomacy and making military decisions kind of relegated them back to their own 501c3 status, right? Where they just, you're not allowed to do anything. Like, just do this, go over here. But it is scary that they are able to kind of creep their way back into the private sectors of people's lives and have an impact. And, the loss of a child, which they typically would call a child, which they conveniently can have plausible deniability about and say, well, it wasn't a child. Oh no, just kidding. Now it might be a child. This just goes to show the chaos that ensues when the church gets involved with things that they have no business getting involved in. And thus, I would say that because of all the points that we've made, and because of the position that these organizations, the MercyOne and Catholic Health Initiative Iowa, find themselves in, it's just all the more reason to not really trust what the church is doing. EJ, I really like the point that you made about Mother Teresa. The church, the Catholic Church, does a lot of damage. It uses its power to do a lot of damage, but then when Notre Dame burns down, they raise I don't even know how much money it was. It was in the billions overnight, right? So for them to be so inclined, so capable of having that kind of global network and to not realize what was happening in their own court case is a little bit concerning for me. And I have to say that you guys all made some great points about that. I'm going to open it up for final comments. Rob, we will go to you first and go down the line to EJ. Go ahead.
Well, like I said, I'm just glad that they're actually using the position that they say that they uphold. Like you mentioned, though, the other company isn't doing that, and I'm not surprised. There's a little bit of gaminess going on with the lawyers, which is just how law tends to go. But if nothing else, if they're forced to take the position that they do actually proclaim to take, then by putting out this message that they have withdrawn the motion, then at least they'll have this in the future. Other people will have this in the future to point to.
Sure. Case law precedents. It's a good thing in the long run. My heart goes out to these parents. Tracy.
I'm just waiting to see what the Catholic Church does next, because we recently lost the Pope, and so it stands to reason there's going to be some changes going on here pretty soon. And so I want to see. I'm really excited to see what happens in the Vatican over the next couple of months.
EJ, close us out.
Yeah. My views on the Catholic Church aren't changing. Having them in any kind of governing authority is a bad idea. If you want to know why, just take a look over Europe. I'll show you all the battlegrounds.
And with that, folks, I just want to thank you for tuning in. I also want to remind you that tomorrow night, our very own EJ, the Ejector seat, will be the featured guest on Meet the ACA, which you can access on the ACD server on Discord. It's the atheist community of Discord server, that is. And that starts at 7 p.m. Eastern, is it, EJ? Or is it?
I believe it is, yeah.
Yeah. So tune into that tomorrow. Thank you for tuning in. Again, we have another episode coming out on Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday this week. And we hope that you will stay tuned.